Welcome to The Next Next. I'm the host, Jason Jacobs. This is a show that sorts through the nuances of athlete development, specifically around youth sports. I'm coming at it from the perspective of a founder who's potentially building my next company in player development, helping athletes and families to navigate the journey, but also as a sports dad, since there's a bunch of topics where there's a clear black and white, but then there's a big gray area, and sorting through that nuance is hard. I know I find it challenging, and maybe some of you do as well. This show brings on well-placed experts from a wide range of backgrounds, and I bring my intellectual curiosity, ask lots of questions, and try to further inform my worldview and help any listeners to inform your worldview as well. Today's guest is a repeat, the first one on The Next Next. I'm bringing back Brett Leonard from Leonard Hockey. Actually, the last episode was with Brett, and it was kind of a general overview of his journey in the sport and what they do at Leonard Hockey. But we ran out of time, and Brett and I were talking after the fact, and we said, hey, I actually asked him if he thought that he could teach me as an apprentice, pretending it was my first day at Leonard Hockey, and I didn't know anything, if he could teach me how to do what he does. So this is a 90-minute deep dive into what Brett does at Leonard Hockey and why, and how I might learn how to do similar. I found it super valuable, and I hope you do as well. Okay, Brett Leonard, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so we just recorded, when even was that? Was that
was yesterday
night? Yesterday morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, yesterday morning. And then we talked, I think, yesterday night, and during the episode, I feel like the beginning, the history and your journey and stuff, right? We started a little slow, and towards the end, once we got started actually into the work, right? It's like you kind of came to life, and you're like a ball of fire, and you started talking about your craft, and then we talked a lot more about your craft last night, and your craft seems really interesting, and you have a lot of like hard-earned lessons that you've grinded through to get the experience that you have, and you start explaining your craft and how you're a one-man show and how there's aspects of your craft that it doesn't necessarily need to be you doing, and then there's other aspects of your craft that only you can do, and that there might be room for an apprentice type, whether it's in-house or outsourced, and whether it's human or software. And we started talking about what that might be, and it's like, wait a minute, like, why don't we just do this live, and let's pretend that I'm the first non-Brett employee of Leonard Hockey, and today's my first day, and I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and don't know anything, and you're just going to teach me how to be a part of Leonard Hockey and what it is that you do. So I think that's the format that we're going with. Does that align with your expectations?
That sounds great.
Okay. Well, Coach, thank you for the opportunity. I'm here. I'm ready to go. Put me to work, but before I get to work, gosh, I need to learn how to be you. So take it from the top.
Yeah. So, the big transition was, going back to what we talked about briefly last time, was all the players I work with, all my clients are now at a foundational level video clients. I think everything has to tie back to the game, whether it's a 12-year-old or an NHL player. I think what you're ultimately trying to develop is their ability to make plays and be effective in a game. And I think when you look at it from that way, like, you've got to start with video. You've got to understand the player and how they do things. Because sometimes players look one way. We all hear this kid's a great practice player. It's maybe like the worst insult and my biggest pet peeve, and such a disappointment that happens. But you hear about those type of players all the time. So really, I think you can prevent that by, again, there's a lot of players that can move really well around cones, or again in just open ice doing set patterns, and they don't have to think, they don't have to even have their head up half the time, right? And they train these skills in isolation, and then you throw them in a game with teammates and decisions and pressure reads and all that, and they struggle. So again, I think it's so important to, I stopped, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, where I just said, sorry, like you mentioned, I'm a one-man show. Like, if you want to work with me, I've got to have you buy into the video piece first, and then the on ice can come next. So every player works on a video program. I have some players, it's almost every game or after every weekend of games. Then I have some players that it might be once or twice a month, all depending on their age and where they're at in their development path. So we take a player. So let's say your first day with me, right? You call, you want to come try this out. I always offer a 3-game analysis package. So what we would do is we'd get 3 games. There are, for older, higher level clients, there's resources like Instat and SportLogic where you can just pull their shifts and upload it right into our tagging software. For the youth players, you might actually have to go manually record their shifts and then put them into a file to upload. But once we get the 3 games worth of shifts, we put them in our software and we start to go from there. The first thing we do is we analyze all the hard data. So like black and white data, metrics, every puck touch. How are they getting the puck? There's 3 ways to get a puck in a game. You can retrieve it yourself, you can get passed to, or you can make a defensive play, intercept, steal it from someone, right? We track how that happens. We track it in 52 locations on the ice. So we start to see like a heat map and where they're having a lot of their activity, where they're getting the puck, how they're getting the puck. We also track success rate. Are they making a positive play? Are they improving the conditions of the play with their puck touch, or are they degrading them? Then from there, we'll look at pass metrics. What types of plays are they making? Are they making driving plays? Are they just making possession plays? Are they saucering it or making it a flat pass? Are they using the boards? Any pretty much detail into passing, we'll track that. Shooting, same thing. We'll track where the shots are coming from, what type of shot, what type of route were they on? Was it a one-timer opportunity that they missed? Again, more tracking in terms of not just getting the data for the data's sake, but more of development type of ideas. So for example, a shooting, like you want to play in the NHL and score goals in the NHL, you have to shoot the puck off the pass. Like it's so hard to score on goalies carrying the puck yourself and shooting. Majority of goals are going to be scored off the pass. It might be a college player, it might be a prep school player, but it's never too young to track that stuff and see, like, is that an area where, again, every time they get passed to, they have to dust it off before they shoot it. So stuff like that we track. So there's lots of hard data, again, black and white, zone entries, passing, some defensive details. That's something where you could hire an apprentice to do. Again, if you have a little bit of hockey background and willing to learn, again, that data is not going to change no matter whose opinion it is. The part that I really specialize in is more of the off-puck and hockey sense type stuff. So looking at a player and how they're becoming available. How are they getting open? Are they rushing into spots too quickly? Are they too late to spots? Are they putting themselves in bad positions? Are they playing inside, in the offensive zone, they're easily covered, or are they doing a good job of sneaking into soft ice and going to the blind spots of defenders? Stuff like that, again, it's unless you've really done it for a long time and had trial and error and learned from your players and done it, it would take a long time to learn that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the starting point.
I have a bunch of questions. I have questions about that process, and then I have questions about what you do with that data analysis across both of those vectors once you have it. But maybe I'll ask about that process first. So can you talk a bit about the process of getting all of that data? How much of it is provided by an Instat or SportLogic or LiveBarn? How much of it are you having to do manually? Are there other sources or tools that you're working with? And how much time does it typically take you to get the data that you need to then sit down and analyze?
Sure. So Instat is pretty unreliable. SportLogic will get you a lot of data, but again, it's more like NHL, AHL, college level. So for a younger player, you're not going to have that access. But they do get you a lot of data, but again, it's going to be a lot more of that black and white data, zone entry, shots, all that. Even when I have players, an NHL player, I still do my own tagging system because, again, I think there's some data, as much as I'd love to have that automated, I still think there's some data that's tracked that is really important. And something I hadn't mentioned is the longer the player works with me, the more that their data tracking gets personalized. So that player's gone through a development path. I might have been working with him for years. It's like unlocking and adding new rooms on a house. Like we're adding stories, we're adding rooms, we're adding different things that a player who I might just first started with is not even close to having the foundation yet to do some of that stuff. I also try to pretty quickly with every player have more of like an asset-based analytics tracking. So for example, like a power forward, I'm going to have more metrics about finer details of how they play below the dots, how they play around the net, how many rebound chances are they getting, how many scoring chances can they create from the back wall walking out to the front of the net, how many times are they arriving at the net on time for rebounds and screening the goalie, their box out skills around the net. Like that's super important for their profile type. So we'll dive further. Whereas, maybe an undersized forward who's more of a playmaker and, not going to be a net front or below the dots heavy type game, right? There's not as much need to track some of that data. So, but they might have a totally different where I'm looking at how many compounding playmaking situations are they putting themselves in? How many backside of the ice passes can they make? How many slot passes are they making? So again, big piece of it starts to get into those assets where, again, you're trying to make that player play inside of what they're best at and put themselves in situations as much as you can. Oh, I think I lost you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I muted because there was some kitchen noise going on behind me.
All good.
Or behind the laptop. But so in terms of learning what the right things to track were and also how to make sense of the data that you track, what was your process to get there? Were there books that you read along the way? How much of that came from your playing days? Were there people that you learned from? Was it trial and error? Do the sport logics of the world just lay it out for you and you don't have to think because it's just there? Someone else thought about it. Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, no, mostly trial and error. I mentioned Daryl Belfry's been an inspiration for me for a long time. And, I don't think I ever got exactly a path, but, he would talk in certain things about certain areas he would look at in his players. And, I'd take some of those ideas and build my own out of it. But it was mostly just trial and error. Sport logic came, I think I got first access within less than a year. So everything I built was well before that. And again, it's constantly growing and
You mean in the past year or less than a year once you started?
No, Sport Logic, I don't know how long they've been around for, but I've only had access to that data for less than a year. So I had already built what I'd been tracking 5-6 years before Instat or Sport Logic, or at least my ability to use those.
And now that they're here, are they changing materially what percentage of the stuff you built you're using, or are you still just...
Yeah, so yep, I'm currently in a process of, at least again for the clients that I have access to that, it's helping me shortcut some stuff, at least again that black and white data. So I am trying to find a way and clean up kind of my coding system where, I can take and print reports and pull clips from the Sport Logic, but then also still will have to grab the player shifts because stuff like, again, the puck support reads and defensive details and a lot of little details just are not tracked yet.
And then as you start to get the analysis done, I guess, first of all, like how time consuming is that and how manual is it? And then once you get there, what next?
Sure. Great question. So the whole process, so again, brand new player, get 3 games. The process probably takes up to about 8 hours. So each game probably takes an hour and a half or so. So to just manually tag all the data, again, I'll go through and do all the hard data first, look at that data, which then helps me kind of just see if that puts me in any kind of direction where, again, like give you an example, if a player only had one shot in the game. That might be and maybe only 3 offensive zone puck touches, or only a couple of puck touches that were off the pass. That would be red flags to how is he reading the game? How is he getting open? Is he not on time? Is he putting himself in bad spots to not get involved offensively? So that would cue me to be like, okay, now I'm going to go back through and maybe look at all of his offensive zone time and watch that slowly, and then start to track some of that data where I'm noticing he's playing in coverage, or he's too late to a spot, or he's too early to a spot, or he's running himself outside the dots when he doesn't need to be. Whatever it may be, I'll start to track all that stuff, and then, put that data together. And then when I get all the data, the hard kind of data and the IQ data, let's call it, then I prints out a matrix for me, and from there I can look, and it'll start to show me, okay, maybe this player touched the puck on his backhand 10 times in the left corner of the offensive zone. And on those puck touches, he only had a 20% success rate. So that'd be a red flag to me. So the 2 things I'm looking for are high frequency, low success rate situations, because if I can improve something that's happening a lot, that's going to have a big impact in that player having an impact in the game. Or the other thing I'd be looking for is something that should be happening a lot, but is happening at a low frequency. So for example, again, like maybe ozone puck touches, or just generally getting pucks off the pass. Those numbers are low because below the average I have for clients or think is reasonable for a player. That would be a red flag. So then I go through and I actually watch the playlist of that situation. So it might be 15, 20, 30 clips. And then I start to look for areas that they're struggling with. Is it a scanning issue? Is it a puck handling issue? Is it protection? Is it a skating issue? Are they just too slow of a skater? They're not getting to spots. Are they, have bad ice geography? So a lot of players, this is something we talked about last night, which I think is always a funny thing to ask your players, but I've made a lot of players faster just by our video work, because I tell them all the time, all right, you might not be the fastest skater, but if I put you on the goal line with Connor McDavid and you guys race to the red line, who's going to win that race? For sure, every person in the world is going to say Connor McDavid. But now I tell that kid, okay, I'll start you at the blue line. You just have to go about 10, 15 feet to the red line. Connor McDavid's got to start behind the net. Who's going to win that race? 12-year-old kids could probably win that race, right? So ultimately, speed is a function of getting to pucks or getting to spots first, right? Or getting to a place with enough time to make a play. If you have better ice geography and you're reading the game better and you're holding middle ice or you're anticipating a little better, you're ultimately a faster player out there. So anyways, taking all that, every time I do this 3-game analysis, I'm looking for 1 to 2 key areas I think the player needs to take their game to the next level. So then I would meet with the player through a Zoom call. I would show them some of their analytics, give them a little bit of background into the data and why we're going to talk about what we are. And then I walk them through the video. I ask them a lot of questions. I think you can learn a lot from just getting inside the head of the player and understand, like, every player is different. Sometimes they've, been coached by their parent, or maybe they've had a bad coach, or maybe just a coach that does things a certain way, or maybe they just have no clue why they do things. But the more you can ask them questions and find out what makes them do what they do or not do what they do, can really speed up the process. So we're constantly going back and forth, asking questions, talking through stuff, pointing out, again, whether it's scanning issues, whether it's how they're collecting the puck, how are they protecting it, walk through all that stuff. Then I'll show them NHL example clips of things they could potentially add, or just even good habits of those players. So now they can see what it could look like. And then from there, right, a lot of the lessons can just, like, the goal of it is to transfer it your next game. So I expect, if we're going over this video on Wednesday and you have a game Saturday morning, I expect you to at least, be improving to some degree what we talked about on Wednesday and transferring it into your game.
And in terms of the things that you identify, is it direct from video II game, or are there also things that you can then work with them on in between the video sessions and the games to try to address those areas specifically? And is that even the tack? Do you address those areas specifically, or are there a wide range of things that you might address with them either in a private lesson or in a group setting?
Absolutely. So it really depends on the player and what situation we're in at that time. So if it's a NHL player, for example, I'm not going to touch them or get on the ice all season long. And let's say it's, early on in the season, we've done a video lesson. I'm going to purposely, make that a very IQ based lesson. So I'm not going to go talk to him in October about an issue with his skating and then say, good luck. Like, you got to figure this out, right? Like, that would make no sense, have no value to him. There are times, again, in players that have worked with me for a long time, maybe they just need a little reminder of improving a technique or positioning themselves a little bit better to scan that. Sure, we could work on it on the ice, but sometimes I'll send those players like a quick little video, and when they get on the ice with us, their team coaches, skills coaches, or again, just have a little extra few minutes before or after a practice, they could watch the video and just get some, quick reminder reps. But I'm always cautious or conscious of the situation and make sure that the lesson's going to help that player. Now, if it's a player that's in my area that I know I can get on the ice with, I might point out more of those, hey, like, we could have used maybe a better skill here, or we could have had something different, but I know I'm going to get on the ice with that kid in a week. So I can point it out a little bit on video, knowing that, hey, we're going to address that in our next lesson. So it's great because they see it, they see how it relates to the game too. And now we can get on the ice and start to work on it. But there's always a component of, the IQ side, and then there's a component of the technical skill side. And it's just more of a matter of timing of when you present it to both. So I will do a lot of long-term development plans with players where now I know they're coming home for the off season, or they're coming to see me for a big chunk of the off season. So now if there is a big flaw, a skating issue, a shooting issue, just a whole new rebuild in how they protect the puck, something that's going to take significant time on the ice. Again, I wouldn't address that middle of the season if I'm not going to be with them. I'd wait and show them after the season and show like, hey, here's a big area. I've studied this from your full season. It's been a common thing. Let's make sure this gets better this off season. So we have this as a new weapon going into the next year.
So these things that you identify, once you put the plan in place, how often are you refreshing the identified things to work on? Like you mentioned that in some cases you're doing video every week. Does that mean that the things to work on are changing every week?
Not necessarily. Great question. I always say there's a trick. So once a player's done after one session, every session moving forward always has a transfer component. So the first 10, 15, sometimes it's a half hour, all depends. In their next set of games, I'm going to track positive and negative transfers of any lesson previously. So obviously the longer the player goes, that list can get pretty long, and I might just shortcut it. Or when I see maybe one area is starting to slip or be forgotten, I'll bring that up. But ultimately, I'm always touching back on recent lessons and showing that player hey, this is great. Here's 5 positive examples that you scanned the ice better. You obviously read the situation better, and look at the positive play you made. And then I might show them, hey, here's 3 times where we forgot to shoulder check over the left shoulder. We missed an opportunity where we had an easy play to make, or the best play available, and we missed it because we didn't look. So yeah, we're constantly reinforcing previous lessons. And what's cool about after a few lessons, typically they're unrelated, but then a lot of times this stuff all connects, and it's, the game's played in a sequence. So a lot of times, I'll give you an example. I think I spoke about it in our last episode, that defenseman who was not activating in the rush, right? So he's got no experience carrying the puck through the neutral zone, making plays on zone entries. He hasn't been part of the rush all season long, right? Now he unlocks that, like I said, that first game he did it in the first period alone, he led the rush 4 times with the puck. Well, do you think and he did pretty well with it, but do you think that was a strong part of his game at that time?
It hadn't been, right?
No, right? But now, all of a sudden, he's doing something, this lesson that unlocked a new part of his game that typically is, so it's, the progression is never just, a straight line up. It's a roller coaster, right? So now he's putting himself in spots, but he's not having as much success. It ends up becoming a high frequency, but likely a low success rate because he's not had the experience of doing it. So now it becomes really cool. It's like, hey, great job. You want to build the confidence that you have unlocked something, but now we got to start to do a new chapter on what do you do when you're on zone entries because you haven't been doing it. So a lot of lessons tend to then lead to a very related next part of the sequence if they start to do the stuff you're asking them, which is really fun to do with the players.
How measurable is progress?
Very measurable. I think there's a lot of key data now, and obviously the stuff I track, and I'll do it for my players too, where something I like I mentioned, I usually give my players every player's different how often they want this and how many, but I give my players kind of key objectives per month, let's say. So again, based on their assets, based on what they're best at. So if it's a good playmaking forward, I might say, hey, your objective is to make 5 slot passes per game with an 80% success rate because no one's ever going to be perfect. 80% is kind of the gold standard. If you're doing 8 out of 10, you're doing it well in a game that's made for mistakes, right? So I might give him that as an objective. I might have him, he's also good on zone entries and rush. So it might be, hey, create 3 scoring chances for yourself or a teammate per game on the rush. So I give them these objectives. So instead of worrying about points or goals, assists, sometimes like assists can be tough to come by. Like you might be making the plays, but if guys aren't finishing the chances you're setting up, well, you get 0 assists in a game. It can feel crappy for that player, or people who don't know any better say, oh, this guy wasn't on the score sheet. But we can go and keep the positive mindset. Like, hey, you had 6 slot passes. Yeah, 1 or 2, maybe you didn't get it to the guy in the right spot where he could shoot it right away. But hey, you made 6 total, and 4 were great A's. Goalie made a great save. The guy missed the net twice. Like, keep going. So I think a lot of that little data can really help versus just looking at the broad numbers of points and plus minus. And if your team won or lost, like when you look at all this data and track it, you can really start to see trends in your players. And then that helps me too. Like, again, if something starts off that we'd worked on and is rising and goes strong and then all of a sudden dips for a little bit, well, that's going to be a red flag to recheck like what's happening there. So it's definitely something you can do.
I've heard, I've just kind of scratched the surface in terms of making the rounds with coaches and scouts and agents. But one of the things I've heard from them just anecdotally is that I think it was an agent that told me if he gets referred to or maybe it was an advisor, if he gets referred to a player, one of the first things he does is just go on Elite Prospects and kind of eyeball like where have they been playing and what do the points look like, right? I mean, in your mind, when you're assessing a player and their competency level and where they currently sit, is that the eyeball test that you use, or do you have it to figure out where they stand?
Oh, I love this. So this has been kind of the fun part of some of my work this off season with Merrimack. I do the player development there. I'm not a coach. Like they have their coaches, and the assistants are really heavy in the recruiting side. But I've had a fun project where I've downloaded and kind of created a database of the major junior leagues now that they have access to, they're allowed to play college hockey. I went through the portal, players are transferring left and right now. So I did a college hockey database. But what I did was, sure, I looked at points and some of that stuff, but honestly, I barely looked at that. What I was looking at is some of the stuff I was mentioning. How many slot passes was this guy making a game? How many were successful? How many slot shots was he getting? How many loose puck recoveries in the offensive zone? How many zone entries were with a shot on net result? different, those details right there, because it's so hard. Like, obviously, and then you watch the player, but obviously there's lots of good players out there. And when you're comparing players, sometimes, like, again, the strength of teams and different, like the OHL is a little bit different than the WHL, which is different from the Q. And this guy might be playing with an amazing player and just picking up points left and right. And this guy's on the worst team, so might not have the same amount of points as the other guy. But if you actually look at some of the data that I think really matters, he's probably the better player. He's just not in the same situation as the other guy. So I think there's a lot of that data that's really cool to look at. And then I did it where I set it all up that you rank every player and create some indexes where the things I think that are important as performance indicators to make the jump to college, those index scores start to, so when the coaches ask me, like, hey, like just the other day, they gave me a list of 4 guys to look at. And that's immediately what I did, was start to look at some of those key data before I ever watched the shift, just to see analytically where do they line up. And then, of course, now I go and watch a couple of games of each player. I can go into a playlist and watch all their slot passes and just start to dive in to really try to figure out, okay, if I had to rank these 4 guys, and also based on what you guys tell me our team need is, this is what I'd tell you. This would be the top guy to try to go get. This would be the next guy. So it's really fun. And a resource like SportLogic is really great for that, where I'm not personally working with the player and doing that day-to-day where I'm tracking their stuff. Well, I can at least get some really good data from SportLogic quickly, get the video clips, and make my assessment that way.
So are the scout skill set and the player development skill set interchangeable in some ways?
Yeah, I think it's definitely very interchangeable, or I at very least think there should be a lot of collaboration there, where I think as a player development guy, I might have more insight into, is that the red flag on the player? Is that something that can be developed, or would be tough to develop, or would take long? Where, like the scouts, they do that for a living. They can definitely pick out a lot of things and project where players would fit, and are very knowledgeable about that. But I think if you tied in a player development piece and work together, and that's kind of what we're doing at Merrimack, is it can definitely maybe, I guess, help you make better decisions and feel more comfortable, and just have that less chance of missing on a player, because again, you can really look and see, like I get asked all the time, like, everyone skates a little bit different. One of the first things I get asked is, you see a guy who's kind of an awkward skater, like, but is it really affecting his game, or like, is it just like the eye test where, like, yeah, he's not the greatest looking skater, but is it really a factor, or is that something that can be improved? And how long would that take to improve?
When it comes to traditional skills, like the world I'm coming from, it's like you play games, and then it's like you might go to edge work, you might do shooting, you might do strength, you might, like, it's like you kind of isolate each skill and you do it in a vacuum with the hope that when you bring that back, you're going to put it together and it's going to improve your gameplay. It almost seems like you're starting from the opposite path, where you start with reviewing the games and then you isolate the highest gain things to work on. So I guess the question is, where do traditional skills fit into this? Does this exist separate and distinct from that, as just it's like, oh, you do those things and you do this, right? Or does doing this kind of become the new quarterback for what you might do there, and might change up what you do there significantly in terms of both what you do, but also how much you do each thing?
Sure, great question. Yeah, no, I'm definitely of the approach, you got to go to the game first, and again, see what the player is doing well, not doing well, and again, tie as much of the development back to the game. So there's a couple ways you can do it. Obviously, like, number one, again, if you're working with a player privately, you can work on, again, those key areas, like I mentioned, that from video, you can walk them through adding different skills, adding better habits into those type of things. I then think you have to get that player into a group of peers where now you can gamify stuff and then get reps. And the power of that is it's not just about playing games. This is a long debate of games versus practices and how much. Games can be great and they're more of like the test of where you're at. The problem with just playing games is, again, you only touch the puck on your stick maybe a minute a game, right? There's the amount of frequency things happen is so low that to really develop in a key area, it would be tough. You'd have to play a ton of games to get 50 zone entries, but maybe in one skill session, if you do it right and set it up right, you could set up a live looking real life pressure and give a player 50 opportunities to make plays inside of that game context where it might take a whole season to get there. So I think it's important, and that ties the IQ part and developing all the important, the skating skills, the stick skills, and the IQ all together. But they're all in. And we talked last night about the ecological approach to skill training, and that's pretty much the philosophy of it, is putting the players inside the game and making sure that the task is teaching the player the skill set that it needs, right? So the skill is dependent on solving the problem in the sport. It's not about, again, just learning isolated technique movement and then hope that then transfers at the right time, at the right read with what the defense is doing, what your offense options are. So yeah, I'm big on that. Now, it's not to say, I don't think I talked about this last time, it's not to say I don't do any technical training. There's definitely times where a player might not move well with a puck. A common thing, and not many people teach it, is the puck should lead movement. Really, when you skate, your upper body should move from the top down, right? So the upper body moves, and you should be moving in segments. So the head and spine rotate, and that's going to slingshot affect your hips and pull your edges in. But a lot of people get taught this edge work where it's all foot focused. Sometimes you're not even using a stick or a puck, and you're just working on leading direction change with your feet. But when you really want to move as efficiently and dynamically as possible, you have to move the opposite way. So some of that stuff can be detrimental, but getting back to what I do is, it's, again, relate it back to the game, get them on the ice, have them do game situational skill development, and then if a flag comes up where this guy could improve his turns, his technical turns, he could improve how he shoots the puck, he could improve, his puck protection skills, then we might have to dive in and go down a path of doing some isolated technique skills, build it to a level where you feel like it's proficient enough, and then put them right back into making reads and seeing if that technique will transfer back into the game situation stuff.
At least here in New England, for a lot of the club kids, it seems like, you get a couple practices a week, maybe a skills with the club, and then a couple games on the weekends, and then of course tournaments and stuff. But largely, the kids tend to do a lot of extra stuff, right? And it's largely on your own for the kid and family to figure out, and it's a lot of more individual stuff, right? I mean, different kids do different things, right? But like, there's shooting, there's edge work, there's shooting pucks at home, there's stick handling at home, there's a bunch of things. I guess my question is, in your ideal world, would they be doing everything in this way, and would they be doing everything with you, or do you think that there's still a role for others? And then in a world where there are others by necessity, because maybe they're part of a program or they're playing for the pros or something, where it's like there's certain team stuff that they just do, right? Like, how does this jive with that, and do they butt heads ever?
Yeah. A perfect world, and this is pretty much what I do for all my, majority of my clients in the off season, is, again, they've done video all season with me. We've probably built out some long-term summer focus plans. We might even continue to do some video work. Maybe it's a player of a similar style in the NHL that, we want to even learn from and see maybe parts of their game we could add to this player's game, or at least some version of it. So we've built that all out. Now each player, or majority of the players, will do 1 or 2 privates a week with me where, again, we're building those key areas. Maybe there are some technical, we want to get a little bit better acceleration, or we want to get a little bit better footwork defensively. Maybe it's shooting and the routes they're taking and how to release the puck inside of movement more deceptively. They're getting all that personal stuff, and they have kind of their summer laid out for them from when they first get back. So they know kind of the plan and all the objectives. Again, they're going to get that personalized work once or twice a week. But then they also skate with me in a group 3 to 4 days a week, where now it's 4 to 8 players. And now we're doing that stuff like I mentioned earlier, where I'm taking what I think is a few common important lessons in game situations, and I'm putting them in a lot of game-like play where there's different constraints to try to make it as game-like as possible, and also give them as many high-frequency chances to develop that skill in that situation. So then what's great about it is the players, one, all have their own kind of personal development plan to attack that week or that month. One defenseman might be really trying to focus on his defensive stick and trying to create as many turnovers in this game, and can still work on that. I have one guy that might be working on how can he get more hidden in the offensive zone and get more pucks off the pass in the slot to try to score goals. So they all have their own personal objectives that none of them really know they're trying to do it, right? But they can do that. I'm video recording it, and I can go talk to them that night, the next morning, or even inside the session, and show them like, hey, remember, we're like, the stick detail here isn't what we were talking about. Like, remember, like, we want it here. And then show them and give them that instant feedback so they can go keep working on it. But then inside the group, they all have the common goal of, I'm trying to think of today's lesson for the pros. Oh, we were doing slot shooting, and we had a couple different games and a couple different drills where we're really working on, again, getting good timing into the slot, one touch shooting from the slot. And again, each guy probably got 30, 40, 50 reps of a real game-like situation where they had to catch a puck. And I think that's the goal of development, is it's not standing there and working on your technique 100 times in the same spot, rep after rep. It's getting a puck where one time the D's right in front of you and you had to push it a little bit or pull it a little bit to get the shot through. And then the next time it might have been wide open. And then the next time the puck was in your feet and you had to kick it to your stick to then, like, that's how it happens in a game. And the more you can add all that, the variables and the chaos of a real game, the more they're going to develop. And again, that's going to transfer to a game versus a player that, again, is standing and might be working on the perfect technique. Well, technique goes out the window the second you put in a defender or a bobbled puck, or it's in your feet. Like, what do you do next?
So are there specialists that these players should work? Do you think of yourself as a general contractor, and then you have like a sub for this and a sub for that? Or maybe it's not a sub, but it's like partners that you like to work with for things that are outside of your purview? Or do you feel equipped to focus on all the things in more of this kind of fluid model that you're describing?
Yeah, I feel equipped, definitely, at least with the skating stuff and pretty much all the skills. I mean, shooting might be the one area where I do think there's some people that do, like, at the very least, it's a very technical, wrist and like snapshot type stuff that I think I'm proficient enough. But again, a lot of times, like, I have so many players, they only have so much time with me. It's not to say it couldn't be outsourced. And it's not to say there's not time and need for that. And again, I think I cover that. But a good way to look at it is, I guess, try to say I'm a general contractor, but I do specialize in a few of those areas too. But it's trying to think. The tough part is, at the very least, with all of my players, getting back to kind of like what you said, like, they all have different team coaches. They all have different team philosophies, what they're getting in take a young kid. Some kids in practice might be doing, just like 1-on-0. Sorry, the cat got in the way. They might be doing, very minimal development work in practice where one might have a great coach who's doing a lot of these type of like small area games and stuff like that. So at the very least, for all my players, I like to be at least heavily involved as much as they want me to be, or at the very least, I can help guide them and say, and sure, again, if you're talking about a 12-year-old who is still growing and is awkward on his edges and stuff, like, could I still do some skating work and still recommend he get some additional time? Yes. And there's obviously great people out there. There's people out there that are probably more specialized in certain areas. But again, it's at the very least, I like to try to stay connected so I at least know what their coaches are like teaching them. And one thing I always have with all my players is I'll never go against, like when we talk about especially the video and positioning and stuff like that, I'll never ever put a player in a place where I'm trying to make them counter what their coach is trying to have them do. I might try to have them find the best way to be as effective inside of whatever structure or system or what they want, but I won't ever put them in jeopardy of, because ultimately they have to play for that coach that year. And that's, I'm going to help them try to make their coach trust them more and lean on them more. But yeah, same thing I guess could be said with outside skills coaches and strength coaches, where at the very least I'd like to know. And then if I really felt like it was a conflict, I'd at least address it and say, hey, like, this is what you're telling me he's being taught. This is my belief. And then there's times where I've had stuff where it's like, yeah, that's spot on. That's how I would teach it. That's great. Why don't you keep doing that? So then you don't have to, we can spend our hours together focusing more on the game related stuff, and you can get that technical work from this person.
In terms of the trained eye to find these insights from the data and then thinking about how to structure drills to work on them, how does one learn how to do that?
Study a lot of hockey.
When you say study hockey, what do you mean? Like study hockey in what format? Study how? What type of things should you be looking for? Is there any framework or structure or books to read or people to learn from, or is it just like try and try again and keep getting up and doing it until you ultimately start getting it right?
Yeah, no, sure. There's, in terms of watching the game, like this is how I learned a lot of my stuff, was just sitting there and having, maybe it's a special focus for every game I watch. So one game I might be looking at just what's happening in the offensive zone. How are all 5 players moving and supporting each other? And when, what does it look like when they're having success and creating scoring chances? And what does it look like when they're turning it over and the other team's easily breaking it out? And you start to notice like, hey, when there's, good shape and the team's more in like a 1-3-1 looking formation that tends to cover the entire offensive zone, it creates multiple options, multiple triangles of puck support. It also, if there is a loose puck, we've got a player in almost every area. We got a much better chance to win that puck back if we've got someone right there to get first touch on it, or at least put pressure right on their guy getting it. And then there, you look at times where, and I did this kind of work for Merrimack offensively. Then there's times where you have 2 players standing still at the net front. You got a 3rd player in the corner. Shot gets blocked. There's this huge gap of ice we don't have any players in, and now the other team easily breaks out. So that's one way you could look at the game. You could also look at, I do a lot of just look at a single player. Look at a player who's doing really well. And I don't always recommend, like, at least if I was a parent or a coach and just trying to learn some stuff, like there are the Connor McDavids and the Nathan McKinnons, and you have to be very careful telling even another NHL player to try to steal from them, because they obviously have something very special about them. That is it. Not to say there's some things you can maybe learn from. Absolutely. I like to watch a lot of guys that are either like younger in the league and just finally having success, and what are they doing? Or even a guy that you look at, a lot of great guys to watch are ones that just are smaller, not the fastest, like the physical skills are just average at best, because then that tells you there must be doing something habit wise, their ice geography, their skill set, their IQ. They must be doing something off the charts that is allowing them to play in the NHL. So that's a great way to look at it, where you try to find some of those type of players and learn, like, how is this guy having success? There's probably, a whole nother NHL worth of players that could skate faster or bigger, stronger, but he's playing in the NHL and those guys aren't. What's he doing? So that's another great way to look at it.
And clearly, working with someone like yourself who has such a trained eye around this video, and then not only identifies player specific areas to work on, but then is really strategic about how to bring about the smart work on those things in game like situations, in group environments to improve them, right? I mean, that would be the highest impact way for a player to improve their IQ. But a lot of players either don't know that someone like you exists, can't justify the cost because it is quite expensive, or doesn't have time in their schedule, or for whatever reason doesn't have access to something like this. In fact, most, the vast majority of players don't, right? I mean, you have what, like a few dozen clients, not, and like how many hockey players are there, right? And so what advice do you have for everybody else who wants to improve their hockey IQ, but doesn't, but it's not in the cards to work with someone like you?
Sure. Again, I would say try to study the game a bit. Like if you're a young player, like me growing up, I think I developed from Marty St. Louis. Like he was like the perfect player. I was fortunate enough to watch him when I was a young kid in Vermont, when he was at UVM, and then followed his whole pro career. So I remember anytime he was on TV, I'd watch exactly what he did. I wouldn't watch anything else but just where he was going, how he was moving. And was I literally like taking notes on him? No, but I think just subconsciously, just watching, I was picking up things at a young age that started to show up and I was doing without even realizing it. So I definitely think there's value of not just going and watching the 10-second highlight of someone, dangling through three players and scoring a goal that, again, happens 1 out of 100 times, but actually go watch a full period of, if you're a right shot defenseman, find a right shot defenseman similar to what you think your style is and go and watch them and try to pick up on what do they do with the puck at the blue line? What are their gaps like? What do they do on breakouts? How well do they scan? What do they use? Are they turning a lot? Are they using more, spin and slide type skills? Stuff like that can, I think, really help a player. Then I would recommend, and it is tough but I would just also kind of audit what you are doing for development and really think, is this making me better in the games? Or is this just making me sweat and work hard and not that having fun's a bad thing, but is it really valuable? Really think, how will this relate to my game? And if you can't answer that, you should second guess maybe how much time or money or effort you're putting into stuff like that. Again, I think there's big value in, I would recommend to parents, we do it with my son's group. We did it all spring. We'd rent the little sheet at Thayer and just get 6, 8, 10, 12 kids and just let them play. And again, the creativity, the passion for the game, all that just really stands out. And I think a player would get a lot more out of playing, a fun 3-on-3 with their friends than to go, do isolated skill work just to work on that. Because again, at least in the game, they're going to be making reads. They're going to be making I don't think players can put themselves in those situations enough where they have to make decisions. They have to protect the puck. They have to read space, all that kind of stuff. And then, simple things I do with my players, ask them questions all the time. But like, if you just break the game down and try to keep it as simple as possible, ultimately, like a couple of lessons this week for players was, ultimately, we want to score goals and we want to stop the other team from scoring goals. It's that simple, right? And when you think of it that simple, you can start to draw things that can help players develop. I had a player today, perfect example. It was an offensive zone, like 4 versus 3 drill. Came around the net. First thing he did was look right up at the point, see if they were open. They had a player coming down the slot wide open, screaming. Their just habit was to look right up at the perimeter. Then I watched them look at the middle. That middle player was now already covered. Situation was gone. Then by the time they looked a couple times, now the defender was on them and they were pinned against the boards and puck was taken. Pulled that player aside, showed him it on the video and said, hey, the priority's always got to be scan the middle first. And there's a lot of coaches out there now that are like doing scanning drills and talking about scan, and it's great. It's definitely better. But I think sometimes, in getting back to the ecological approach, I think it's really cool is, yes, we want feedback and we want coaching for sure, but sometimes just setting up the right environment will teach the players that. So again, if I set up a drill where you have to pass it to the slot to score, that's the only way you're allowed to score, or maybe you're not even allowed to make perimeter passes, well, what do you think that player's hopefully going to start to do? Every time they touch the puck, the first thing they're going to be doing is trying to look to see if there's a player in the slot. That's the only thing you're allowed to do.
Right.
You can set up constraints and environments to allow them to do that. And if they're struggling with it, you can stack the deck in their favor more and give them a 5 versus 3 or 3 versus 1 to, at the very least, typically have more time and space and more of a number advantage to create that. And then as they get good at it, you start to challenge it even more. With the pro guys, a lot, especially towards the end of the summer, we do a lot of like 2 versus 3 or 3 versus 4 type work where now the deck's stacked against them. And if they can figure out how to create a scoring chance 3 versus 4 in the offense zone, that's real development and real challenging. And even with a cool part about the ecological approach I really learned lately is just even to get back to the technical skills. Is a lot of the work I do now is, it's easy to get out there and tell a kid to bend his knees more or do this with his hands on his shot, and you make them internally focus. And a lot of times you're just going to beat your head on the wall. And things I learned from some of the books recently were giving them external cues. And with my strength and conditioning background, I always kind of knew that, but definitely improved on how to do it. But a lot of the stuff I'll do is, again, I'll use markers on the ice or some kind of constraint where I don't tell the player, like if I notice a player should shift the puck a little bit wider in their movement, they're too narrow, like the movement they would do would not really work or is not getting the right pattern I want, I might just, again, use a spray paint line. That's all I say is, hey, when you make this move, I want you to bring the puck across this line. Or if I tell them they have to finish, sometimes they do something and they kind of, once the skill's executed, they stop doing it. So I'll add something that makes them have to explode out of it, where now all of a sudden the movement gets better. And then one really cool one I discovered, I just started doing it the other day. And I joked with my player because he was probably old enough. I said I Miyagi'd him. And I said most of my kids would not have any clue what Miyagi means.
I'm 49, so I definitely know what Miyagi is.
Oh, what I did, and this I didn't learn from anyone. Maybe I did and just didn't realize it. But I had a player really working a technical turn for a long, like really struggled with it. And we finally were getting it to a place where it was pretty good. Wasn't great. And it was, again, like when a player is working on technical stuff, they're really in their mind and they're very rigid. And it can definitely a roller coaster ride of it. Hey, we got a good rep. And then the next rep, they're overthinking or over putting their weight. And it doesn't have a flow to it. So I created what I could think of as like a ridiculous movement they would never want to do. Something that was really confusing, technical. And what I did was I put one right before the turn they had been working on and one right after. What do you think happened to that turn for that player?
It got tighter.
It got what?
Tighter.
It got way better. Yeah. It was game-like execution. because now their brain switched to this confusing thing they had to do before, this really weird, made no sense type of skill after. And now they stopped thinking about the turn, and now the turn was amazing. And from that point on, that player has now, again, it's a player that works privately with me. And now when he's been in the group setting, now all of a sudden that unlocked the ability to just do it naturally in a game-like situation. So there's a lot of cool with the ecological approach stuff that I've learned where it's stuff like that, where again, I don't think I got that idea from it, but kind of it does teach around that path where I don't know how it came to me, but I just tried it about a month ago, and now it's kind of one of my secret weapons when I am doing technical work. It's okay. Sometimes you do have to make the player aware to make some changes, but as soon as you can get them to stop thinking about it with tricks like that, you can get it, because we want to automate the skill. We don't want them in a game going down the ice and being like, oh, I got to, put my weight on this foot first and then pull the puck this way to execute this turn. You might have to train it that way for a second, but we got to get it out of that stage as quick as possible.
And coming back around to Leonard Hockey, so there's a couple different ways that it seems one might scale this approach, right? One would be an apprentice like me, right? I'm here, I'm ready to work, coach, right? And help me offload more of the stuff that doesn't need to be used so that you can focus on more of the stuff that can only be you, and then you can serve more people without compromising quality, right?
Sure.
So that's a path I'd love to talk about. And then the second path would be, how do you take what's in your brain and maybe package it in a way that is lighter touch and more digital and more automated, so it could serve a lot more people in a way that might not be as good as the full-on Leonard Hockey way, but is a lot more accessible for people, where it's like better than nothing. It's not as good as the real thing, but it's a lot better than nothing, right? And so I'd love to just get your thoughts on each of those paths and how one might proceed, and also just what you want to do.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely at a stage now where I've gotten to a point where I'm turning away clients because it's or close to turning away clients because it's maxed out, or at least at different stages of the season, especially during the year. There's been times where I've had to put people on hold or on a waiting list. So definitely, like the black and white data, like I mentioned earlier, I think is definitely something almost anyone could learn, especially if they have passion for the game or a little bit of experience with the game. And that data, it probably takes twice as long or three times as long as the data I do. So it'd be great to start to get more people involved, where someone could be assigned 10 different players, keep track of getting their game clips, getting it uploaded, doing the black and white data, which then also would go into the analytics report for the player. Someone, they could be responsible for that. And then I would come in at kind of the last hour, already have a data report for me, which then would shortcut my way to what are some of those IQ type skills and off puck reads and all that stuff that I could quickly go through, analyze those, do the data for that, and then quickly decide on what is this player's key learning lesson for the week, for sure.
So maybe taking over some of the analysis that is more straightforward, and where there's an objective. It's like counting reps or doing things that you don't need a trained eye to do. You just need to be diligent.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's kind of tedious work, but if you understand what a puck retrieval is and the left half wall, you could tag it and do that stuff. Or again, a shot's a shot. Is it a slap shot, a snapshot, a one-timer? What location was it? What was the result? Was it a goal? Was it a save?
I mean, is this stuff you should be getting from the platforms you're already working with?
Yeah, like some of that stuff you would get. But again, I guess that could be another part of this conversation is I haven't fully done, okay, is there a way to get that data uploaded and then still have the stuff I track uploaded and have it kind of be seamless. Because when I tag it all, it creates the video files for me all in one kind of playlist. There would have to be some extra work to take that outside source, put it in. And again, we're also talking that only exists for, maybe 60% of my clients that are playing college or above. And then for those youth prep school type players, you got to start, there's no data for them whatsoever typically. So you got to do it all by hand anyway.
But that's something you could train an apprentice like me to do.
Absolutely.
And I mean, how would we do that? Would it just be sitting and watching you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would be, probably could learn it in 3 to 5 games, watch me do one, and then probably sit there with you and you go through and start to remember. I remember when I first did it, it was probably took me 3 hours to do one game, and now definitely much quicker. So it's just sitting there. The nice part is like there's some video, like the video coaches for teams, like the Merrimack guy, like he has to sit there and live do it and tag all this video while the game's going on. So then when the coaches come in the locker room in between periods, and that coach wants to see those 8 shots we let up that period, he's got to have it there ready for him, plugged in the TV in the coach's room, so that coach can look at it and see what he wants to address in his in between game speech. Nice part is this is all obviously not live footage, so you can take your time through it and make your mistakes and kind of work through the process. But
the first place you would go is more on the analytics side, not the on-ice help, for example.
yeah, definitely. I think, one, it's, again, we're talking black and white data type stuff. So I think that could quickly be learned again after just doing a few games. And then it would be a little bit longer of a process. But as you did it more, you would just quickly recognize, the situation and remember everything that needs to get tagged for that specific situation. Because again, you're going to have like a code button that actually takes the file and creates a video file and creates a number for the analytic report. But then you're also going to tag labels for it. So again, you take a shot, for example, the shot is the code button, but then you've got to tag what kind of route the player was on. Were they standing still? Was it a one-timer? Was it a snapshot? Was it a rebound? So you might have to hit 5 or 6 buttons just for one play. And backing up to that, you have to tag how he got the puck in the first place. Did he, so maybe I picked up a loose puck in the corner, came around and shot it. Well, you have buttons you have to do for that retrieval in the corner and what he did. And then was the play successful? And then go to the shot. So the data can pile up pretty quickly. But that would definitely be the easiest. I think on the ice is tougher. I haven't spoken much about this, but with the on ice, that's really more of, I think, my years of experience and learning from my players and learning from other people. But I don't ever write drills. I haven't wrote a drill in probably the last 5 or 6 years. I have, if it's a group and I'm, again, tackling like a game concept, like a zone entry situation, right? Like I'm going to have that kind of initial area and usually start out with some kind of game or game-like drill with real pressure pretty much immediately and put them in that situation. And then from there, I'm reading, what are we struggling at? And then that's going to tell me the next drill. So if, it's, that's probably a more complicated one for people listening. So let's just take the game I did today where the slot passing. All right. So I set it up. They're playing 3-on-3 to start, trying to make slot passes. The only way you can score, you can pass it however you want, but the only way you can score is a pass has to go into this little slot box I drew on the ice, and it has to be a one-touch shot. So who knows what's going to happen for the collective group, and you're trying to help as many of them as possible. But let's say the common theme is, again, how they're getting to the pucks They're closing their body off to the slot. They're not prioritizing scanning the slot. Okay, we might go do a quick drill that works on that technical skill and just get reps and walk through it for 5 minutes. Okay, now we throw it back in the game. Okay, that's gotten a little better. Now maybe the issue is we're making great slot passes, but the person in the slot is not ready to one-time it. Their body positioning's terrible. The way they're catching the puck's terrible, and they're not able to one-touch shoot it. So we might set up a drill to work on rotating, and maybe the puck moves around multiple places, and this player's working on just adjusting so that they always stay ready as a shooter. Or a lot of times players will go and kind of just get set, and a lot of players have a catch the pass first mentality and then figure out what to do. Well, that we might do something to help train that. Now we go back to the game again. Now maybe that's better. Maybe everything's really good. So now again, maybe I make it 4-on-4. So there's a little bit more defenders, less space to make it more challenging, or really advance it by going 3 versus 4. But point being is, or even in a private lesson, sure, we have, again, let's say it's a session right after a video. We've got our areas to focus on. Yeah, I've got a good sense of where we're going to go. We might check off a couple of things that comes easy for that player. But now all of a sudden we try to add the next piece and it completely blows up the progress. And then all of a sudden you find out, this player really struggles with, a certain skill or aspect inside of this sequence. Well, now we might have to spend 20 minutes working on that technical part because it's the missing piece. It's the missing link in the chain that's holding them back from being able to progress. So point being is that's the tough part of just saying, sure, can I bring someone on the ice and have them start to learn it and try to teach them like, this is what I'm looking for? Absolutely. But I think that would take, would it be helpful to have someone out there? Absolutely. But to have someone be to a point where, hey, I would feel comfortable sending you to go do this on your own would take quite a bit of time. Now, like you said, does every player need me on the ice? Is training someone on the ice to get at least proficient and maybe some more of the foundational situations that are easier for a new coach to comprehend and younger players to follow? Yeah, definitely. I think that's something I should explore more, where over time, again, but this assistant could go run a group of players that might not need all the bells and whistles that I might have. Does that answer your question, all right?
It does, yeah. And what about on the analysis side? I know you mentioned that SportLogic has some AI to it. For the aspects that SportLogic doesn't cover that you're doing yourself, what's your sense in terms of, like, could you train a model to start to learn what's in your brain and start to do some of the decision making that you do when it sees things, in a repeated way? Like if it sees you say, oh, when this happens, it means this, so therefore they should work on that. Or when this happens, it means this. And, if they go outside of these parameters, like, is it too complicated, or do you think there could be rules around it that could help, at the very least, start giving you a baseline to work from versus starting from scratch?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely doable. I'm not very familiar with AI and exactly how that works. But I have started thinking about it, and it's definitely a complicated, but I think it's doable. It's just more of, getting, I guess, more precise in the rules of what I'm looking for. But again, there are a lot of variables and every player is different. Like some team systems are a little bit different, where I might want a player to be in a certain area, but their structure wants them to at least be in a certain spot before he would go and do something like that. I think there's ways, like, it gave me an idea of, like, if there's a way to teach AI, like for my defenseman, I'm big on anticipating when the player you are going to, defend on the puck is getting the puck. Like, the sooner you can get there, the more success you're going to have. Every player is most vulnerable as they're getting the puck, right? If you give a good player a little bit of time and space, see you coming, now the deck's stacked in their favor. So maybe it'd be a cool thing to be able to flag that okay, I see this player, this is the player I'm following. I can track, like, I know SportLogic can track stick checks that player makes, or body checks, or defensive plays he makes, successful or unsuccessful. But it'd be cool to track, maybe it's a red flag if it ever takes more than 2 seconds. So you can see like the average time of that player. Like that would be something I would look at. I don't think I would do it as hard data. Maybe I should. I'm learning as I talk to you. But, it'd be cool to look at, okay, if this defenseman on out, like maybe there is a correlation that when he gets to the puck carrier in 1 second or less, when he switches to the puck, maybe he's got an 80% success rate in stopping that play. But if it's 1.5 seconds or longer when he gets there, maybe it's a 20% success rate. That's the kind of stuff I'm constantly looking at and kind of challenging to look for that stuff, and then see, what does that data tell me? And then that's something that's teachable. So then, I learned that through an NHL player, really studying those details, but that might be a lesson for my 12, 14-year-old D that, like, hey, might not be so important now, but it's a great habit to build and start to play with a mindset. Or you throw it again into a small area game with constraints that says, okay, you have 2 seconds or 3 seconds or less to create it. Like, I'm going to put a puck to the offensive team. Defense, you have 3 seconds or less to create a turnover. And again, train them and put them in an environment where, okay, they understand the sooner I can get to a player as they're getting the puck, typically means a higher success rate in creating a turnover. That's how we're going to train today. So that's something I think, along those lines. Doesn't have to be that specifically, but that's the kind of stuff I'd be interested in exploring. And could you train an AI or a model to get a lot of that cool data that, again, is more player development, where I think a lot of the data is driving more scouting, even though I do think it is connected.
I mean, that's one of the things I'm thinking about, is just because if you take like a legal doc and you upload it to, ChatGPT, I'm no expert on this, but from what I can gather, you can take a legal doc, you can upload it, and it will tell you this thing's standard, that thing's standard, that thing's standard. This one there, like, that's a little tilted in this side's favor, and that one there, that's a little tilted in your favor, and everything else looks nice and clean, right? And it's like, well, why would I pay a lawyer if I have this? And it's like, well, you know what? Like, you should probably still have a human in the loop and pay the lawyer to at least eyeball it and, like, yes, I agree with this analysis or not, but it gives a starting point that probably means that you're paying for a half or a quarter of the billable time from the human that you would have paid without it, right? And so here it seems similar, where you could train a model over time and the model could learn, and, like, you're still going to need the human in the loop. It's not going to replace the human, but it means that, like, your time could go further and further. And then it's like, well, if that's true, how do you train a model? Well, you train the model with a lot of video and a lot of analysis, and then connecting the dots between the piece of the video footage and the piece of the analysis, right? And then if you do that with enough scale, then the model should be able to handle more and more edge cases over time, right? And it's like, okay, well, how do you get that scale? Well, you have a lot of coaches using this platform, a lot of players uploading their stuff, and a lot of coaches doing the analysis, right? A lot of humans involved, right? And it's like, well, what's the value proposition to the coaches? Like, why would they, use this versus just doing it on their own, like you've been doing? And it's like, I don't know yet. And I don't, it's not going to work unless you do it in a way where it's a win-win-win, right? It's got to be good for everybody. But you can see how, if you could do it, it would help the coaches' bandwidth go further so they could serve more customers. It would lower the price point of the services, which means that more people could be a part of it. And it would grow the skill of the game. It would be good for the players and good for the game, right? But like, yeah, it's, I think with anything new, right, it's like, like the narrative is like, it's going to take away our jobs. And, like, I don't actually think that's true. I don't think it's going to take away jobs. I think it's going to take away the shit that no one wants to do, so they can focus on the shit that only them can do. And then it's going to mean that they can serve more people over time, especially in a place like this where it's so nuanced and where there's so much taste involved and stuff that, like, it's hard to kind of put hard rules around. But yeah, I don't know how that would be received, but that's kind of an area I'm poking on and I'm interested in learning more about, but that's about as far as I've gotten. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I definitely think you're onto something. I think for someone like me, yes, it gives you the ability to maybe offer a more friendlier price point product that helps more players, gets your name out there. But I think it will also help you attract a player and bring them into kind of this philosophy of training and how important the video stuff is, which would probably bring people like me more business where, sure, like you said, you still need the human in the loop. And maybe a player starts off with the software or whatever this product would be at a younger age and develops, but now they start to outgrow and do need a service like I provide where they need a little bit more detail. But at the very least, if it could at least speed up and shortcut a lot of the manual labor that isn't, those hours aren't going into making the kid better. It's just preparing the data and preparing the video and the reports. Then yeah, that's a no-brainer for me, where now I could service maybe 150 players a year instead of 50 because a lot of that work is done for me.
Yeah, I mean, a good example is like podcast transcripts. Like, I don't know if it's still this way, but like a year or two ago, you take the audio file and you upload it, and then if you want just a transcript that's fully AI, it's cheap, but there'll be a lot of mistakes, right? If you want one that's AI and then a human goes in and does all the corrections, right? Then it's more expensive, but it's a lot more accurate, right? So I mean, you could kind of see that moving in that direction in this world where it's like, look, like you can get some analysis done. It's a baseline. Like it's not going to be perfect, but it'll give you more insight than nothing, right? And it's going to be cheap. But if you want the human involved or fully human, yeah, you can graduate to that. But like the higher the quality, the more you're going to pay, right? But at least there'd be an entry point for everybody else, something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for the lesson. It was helpful to me. I don't know if it was helpful to you. I feel like if I got my black and white data training up to speed, then maybe it could be helpful for you. But yeah, I don't know. The road to get there still seems pretty daunting. But we did cover a lot of ground here, Brett. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wish we did?
No, I think we covered everything.
Great. I'm really thrilled that you made the time, and you're also going to be a super valuable sounding board as I get further along as a practitioner who's doing this at some of the highest levels in the game. Whatever we end up doing here, we want to do in a way that people like you are excited by and see how it will help, and not feel like it's either amateur hour garbage, like don't go near it, or it's a threat, because I don't think it's going to be either of those things. And if it were either of those things, I wouldn't want to do it. So I don't know exactly what we're doing, but I think conversations like this are just invaluable to helping inform that, and hopefully invaluable to listeners too, in terms of how to think about their own player development, how to think about how to balance skills and games and video analysis, and how those fit together, and how they might think about selecting providers as well, whether it's Leonard Hockey or somebody else. But I wouldn't be surprised if you get some new customers from it as well, although it doesn't sound like you need them.
Could always probably use a couple more. And especially now that I got you doing the black and white data, I'll be able to take on at least a few more.
Yeah, put me in, coach. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, no. That just brought up another thought was, I definitely think you're on to the right thing, and just I'm kind of remembering some recent products, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Super Deker.
Oh yeah, we've got one.
So and my son uses it from time to time, and again, I'm thinking from a development standpoint, again, 5-6-year-old using it when he used it, probably great fun. He's not going to want to go do drills or anything like that with me at that age. So obviously it's engaging. It starts you. Now I think last time I was at Pure Hockey, now there's one where it's like you put an iPad up, right? Because the knock on the Super Deker was, it's just like I have my problem with obstacles on the ice, is you have to look down to avoid the obstacles. And that's the last thing you want to be doing when you're, weaving through traffic through the neutral zone, is be looking down at the puck. So the Super Deker, you're looking down. So then I saw someone invented, like, again, an iPad stand and an iPad app where you could stick handle on their board, but you have to track the iPad and have your head up when you're doing it. So again, a better version, but again, it is stick handling to where this fake environment is telling you to, is that going to really transfer to a game? Is it a step better? Probably. But is it going to transfer? So again, I think it's really cool that I think it's a totally untouched product area where whatever you end up coming up with is, something that, again, helps people like me and the philosophy we have where, finding a product that actually trains the IQ and connects the skill and the IQ, whatever that may be, still probably early to tell. But I think if it's something along those lines where it is rooted in game transfer and how you create that, but I think you're onto the right thing. And I think it's only going to help the game and help people like me. Because like you said, I think it can at least create and put a jump and help players get better. And then as they get better and they see the value, people like me probably, make more sense than using the Super Deker all summer and hoping that means you got the best hands come next season.
Yeah, and people in the hockey world are asking me, it's like, well, wait, if you're starting a company, what is it? What are you building? I don't get it. Tell me what it is. How does it work? How much does it cost? And it's like, the way I build, I don't anchor on the solution. I anchor on the problem. And then I go on an exploration of learning and experimentation to look at different approaches to best address the problem. But it's the problem, right? And so when I think about the problem, it's like, instead of just blind, skills, or blind games, right? It's like, well, what's happening in the games and how's the player doing and what does the player need to work on? And then being a lot more targeted and surgical about what to work on to identify the highest leverage things that'll improve their gameplay. And also, yes, connecting the dots between how do you deliver those things and make them engaging and where there's adherence and progress and accountability, sure. But like, I started out like, oh, it's going to be Peloton for home skills. And now as I'm getting into it, it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, in a way, that's just reinforcing the problem, right? Of just like, it's just more. And like maybe more of stuff that's isolated and not represented in gameplay is not only not productive, but maybe it's even detrimental. I don't know. Like, that's the exploration that I'm on. But yeah, my current thinking is much more aligned with your approach, which then changes what we'll ultimately build.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brett. Nice to catch up again. I'm sure this dialogue will continue. And yeah, I look forward to watching your progress and vice versa. And maybe there'll be things we can do together.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Next. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and you haven't already, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast player, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or any of the others. We also send a newsletter every week on the journey itself, the new content that we publish, the questions that we're wrestling with, how the platform itself is coming along that we're planning to build for player development, and where we could use some help. And you can find that at thenextnext.substack.com. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.